David here again, your certified public accountant and management consultant. I'm your host, Crossroads Navigating Business Challenges. Welcome once again. Earlier in the day, I mentioned a couple of things that are forthcoming, and I just want to sensitize you today as to all the lineup that we have. But just before, I just need to remind you always, jump onto our website, EtienneStrategicMC.com. Check out our social media platform and ensure to subscribe. And always join the conversation, because it's all about the conversation. So we can get your feedback, we'll be able to respond to you, and we'll be able to learn together. So today, on Crossroads, we want to look at certain components that are less traveled, so to speak, less discussed, and less thought about by quite a few of our smaller business owners. At the start or at the outset of our podcast, I sensitized you to the fact that we will be having several industry experts, individuals who have been there, have done that, know what it's all about. And so we'll be having them on to our podcast to discuss, to explain, and basically to respond to some of the concerns, that you have. So here we go. Normally when we talk about business challenges, the average business person may think of things like inventory management, cash flow management, break-even analysis, etc. Those things are important. They are critical. They are crucial things to be considered. However, there are certain variables that I will now refer to as macro variables that directly impact the ultimate sustainability and profitability of your business. But because they are not directly at your doorstep, as our cash flow management, inventory management, break-even analysis are, then sometimes as business persons we tend to overlook them, and we tend to fail in recognizing the direct impact that these things have on the ultimate profitability and sustainability of our business. What does that mean for navigating business challenges? By failing to realize that there are variables that, though distant, have direct impact on our day-to-day operations, then we fail at effectively managing these challenges. So today, I just want to expose, or to share with you rather, a couple of those areas that are quite often overlooked, and also to emphasize that these are the particular subject matters that we will be discussing in depth when we start to engage with our experts from the industry. So we have a lot of good stuff coming, and I really want to ensure that you guys are engaged and you guys are part of the conversation. A couple of things. Now, everybody speak of inflation. Yep, inflation. Inflation happens to be one of those things that the average business person is aware of, but it is seldom seen as directly impacting how I manage my inventory, how I look about ascertaining my optimum output level, etc., etc. But inflation, though seen as one of those macro variables, okay, it affects or it impacts the economy at large. As business persons, we need to recognize and factor into our analysis the impact of inflation. Because remember, we do not operate in a microcosm or in a box. We are a small component of a larger village, what we call the global society or the global community of business operators. So we have to be sensitive to those things. Currently, I mean, since COVID, even before, but more so since COVID, you have been hearing about supply chain management. And this has come into the fore of discussions because, yes, there have been significant disruption in supply chains. We normally think of supply chains in relation to large manufacturing concerns, to large operations dealing with shipping and cross-border shipping, etc. But no, because remember, as a small operator, you having the necessary supplies or stock or raw material to be able to deliver to your clients is based on the ease, the convenience, the readiness of you receiving your supplies. So you may not think that, okay, the shipping line of XYZ company is now not operating because of so-so. But remember, your lumber, your tools, your equipment, they are sitting on that ship. And yes, they will pass through several different middlemen before they reach to you, but you're going to be impacted by the supply chain issue. Labor shortage. Well, that's one that most businesses, whether you're small, medium, or large, have to contend with from time to time, but much more so during the COVID period, because we all know the toll it took and is still taking on the whole availability of labor. So labor shortage is one of those things that, yes, it is a macro issue, but it trickles right down to what we call the bread and butter of the average small business operator. Energy cost, rising energy costs. And I'm just going through these things just to sort of expose you to them. Rising energy cost. So the price or the price of oil on the market. Yes, so I'm here in my neck of the woods and I'm operating my business. And I hear on the news about the rising cost of oil and gas. And it sounds as if it's just way across the globe. No direct impact on me. But when you think about it, all of these things are going to have a trickle-down effect that will impact our bottom line right here, right now. Cost of capital. As a matter of fact, I will say availability and cost of capital. Yes, every business at some point or the next is faced with a challenge in accessing capital. So we're talking about cost of capital or the cost of borrowing money. It is a reality. It is a reality. But the cost of borrowing is a macro factor that involves the federal government, the Federal Reserves, the banking system, the whole institutional framework is involved in that. So when we try as small business operators to say, let me seek some funding from my local bank or etc., it's either you hear that no, not available, or if available, it comes at exorbitant cost because the cost of capital has gone up and it impacts us about everybody. So those are some of the things that they impact us directly. But quite often when we think about the challenges of operating a business, the way that we go about navigating these challenges, we tend to be very narrow as to what components we ought to be focusing on. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we think of, yes, inventory management, critical. We think of cash flow management, critical. Okay? We think of our production line, critical. But then all those things are impacted by broader variables that are more on a macro scale. There are some terms and concepts that are bandied about from time to time. One of the main ones is what we hear about: diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's as if nowadays in the workplace, if you're not talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, then you're not up to speed with what is happening. Because that or those considerations have become so critical in the workplace that for an employer or an organization to do less than give ample attention and focus to these things would be to court disaster. Because diversity in the workplace, inclusion, and the whole concept of equity is center, up front and center in terms of the whole operation of organizations. HR, I can recall the days when back in the day, we used to talk about the personnel department, which basically was a department that handles staffing. And the personnel department was interested in hiring or firing or managing pay scales and vacation time. That was what it was, personnel department. Then it evolved into human resources department. And by evolving over time and having a change of name, we came to the point where workers were now seen as more than just a convenience and let's call it a necessity, but it's a resource, human resource, not just a person, but human resource, meaning an integral component that any business needs and has to manage in order to be successful. Then later on we'll talk about human capital. Watch the evolution. We now talk about human capital. By describing individuals, workers as human capital, it lends itself again to a furtherance of an acknowledgement of the importance of people in organizations. Human capital. And so companies are now focusing on developing their human capital. So you talk about providing programs, facilities for further training, development in your career, because organizations realize that we need to enhance, bolster, improve our human capital, because that is one of the integral components on which the sustainability of our operation depends. And the last one that I mentioned is change management. Change management. I find this one to be very interesting, because all organizations, in whatever industry, at whatever level, will go through changes from time to time. But in the long distant past, organization did not stop to consider that change is something that needs to be managed. So you had a process. You decide, okay, we're going to change the process from this format to our next format. Let's just announce it. We're moving from this way of doing business to another way. Let's implement it. We're moving from a manual system of tracking inventory to some computerization. Let's implement it. Not recognizing that, no, it doesn't happen that way. Any significant change at the organizational level has to be managed. And so a number of attempts to bring about changes experience monumental failures. Why? When you reflect and evaluate, you realize, for one, there was no buy-in to the change. There was no proper communication of the intention and the potential outcome of that change. So organizations quickly realize that, okay, change has to be managed. Okay? The last one I mentioned in this category is what we call, the acronym is ESG, and I made like a note here: E for environmental, S for social, and G for governance. And the principle is, for a company to be viable, sustainable, successful, then it must operate within a certain framework that give credence and importance to the environment, the social aspect of the workflow and the people's life, and also to government. So you hear about ESG and, of course, other acronym that relates to the same consideration, the same way of doing things. So those are some of the things that I thought I would share with you today, because those are the, let's call it, subject matters that we're going to basically explore at length and in depth. And so when I have my experts, and should I say guarantee? Yeah, I'm going to put my neck on the line and say guarantee. As of our next podcast, we're going to start to have interactions, sessions with these experts, and they will be addressing these issues, these subject matters in depth, at length. And at that time, if you are not engaged, if you are not being part of the discussion, then I would more than encourage you to be involved. Be involved. So what are we to expect from these experts? A number of things. First, and most of these individuals, they have evolved over time, meaning that they have experienced organizational processes from a corporate standpoint, meaning as officers of corporations. They have evolved to realize that, okay, there's something more to be had. And so they have, as we say, put up their own, people have different terms for it, put up their own four walls and roof, so to speak. And so they bring a level of expertise, a level of experience that straddles the corporate arena and also their tenure in their own operations. So we'll be having experts that deal with all of these issues that I mentioned and a lot more. Exciting things, exciting times. What do I ask of you? Have an open mind. Okay? Have a sponge-like mind to absorb, and not only to absorb, but having absorbed, to apply a lot of these things, a number of these things, to recognize the gravity, to recognize the value of these discussions, and by so doing, to be empowered. That's our podcast for today. Crossroads, navigating business challenges, where the emphasis of today's podcast was nothing more than to sensitize us to the fact that business challenges, yes, some are very obvious and they are right there at your door, and so you can reach out and touch and handle, but there are other variables that are broader. They are more on a macro level. And as business persons, failing to recognize that the business world is much larger than us, but we are very dependent on it, as I said earlier on, would be to court disaster. That's my bit today. So this has been Crossroads Navigating Business Challenges. David here reminding you that you need to jump onto our website, go to a social media platform, okay, subscribe, and be involved, listen, engage in the conversation.